Welcome to episode 55 of EDH Commander Challenge, our 500 subscriber special. I'm your host, BT. And before we get started, I just want to say thank you to our over 500 subscribers. You guys are awesome. On behalf of our entire team here at BT Game Night, we cannot thank you enough for your continued support. We are on our way to 1K. And when we reach 600 subscribers, we'll be doing another giveaway. In the past, we've done a custom playmat and a foil promo lightning greave. So let us know in the comments what you would like to see as a prize for when we hit 600 subscribers, hopefully in the near future. Now, as a token of our appreciation for helping us reach this incredible milestone, we'll be having our second ever 4-player multi-matchup. The generals featured today include Marc's Mazirek, Kraul, Death Priest. He keeps a hand including Tainted Wood, West Vale Abbey, Golgari Rot Farm, Soul Ring, Explosive Vegetation, Vona's Hunger, and a Carrion Feeder. Next we have Jodah, Archmage Eternal, played by Matthew. He keeps a hand of Wooded Foothills, Sunbird's Invocation, a Plains, Arid Mesa, Sandworm Convergence, Jin Gitaxia's Core Ogre, and a Commander Sphere. Then we have Armin, who's playing his Chainer Dementia Master. He keeps a hand with 5 beautiful snow-covered swamps, a Soul Ring, and a Bitter Blossom. And finally, I'm playing my Titania Protector of Argoth deck, and I keep a hand with 2 forests, an Arbor Elf, Nostalgic Dreams, Lifecrafter's Bestiary, Desert Twister, and Explosive Vegetation. So let's get started with this 4-player match. I won the dice roll, so I'll be starting us off. Let's go! So I start us off by playing a forest and casting an Arbor Elf. Then I pass to Matthew. For Matthew's turn, he plays a Wooded Foothills and pays 1 life to sack it to search out a breeding pool tapped before passing. For Marc's turn, he plays a Swamp and casts a Soul Ring for a good start before passing to Armin. Armin chooses to match Marc move for move by playing his own Swamp, albeit a snow-covered one, and plays his own Soul Ring. For my next turn, I play another Forest and pay 3, including using my Arbor Elf's ability, to cast Lifecrafter's Bestiary and pass the turn to Matthew. For Matthew's turn, he drops another fetch land in the form of Arid Mesa, and again he pays 1 life to sack it to search for a Blood Crypt into play tapped, and passes to Marc. For Marc's turn, he plays a Tainted Wood and pays 3 to cast Ashnod's Altar before passing to Armin. And for Armin's turn, he plays another snow-covered swamp and casts Bitter Blossom before passing to me. For my turn, I scry 1, thanks to my Bestiary, and put it at the bottom of my deck before drawing for my turn. I then play a Forest and tap 3 to cast Harrow. I sacrifice a Forest to search for 2 more and put them into play untapped. Then I pay 2 to cast Devoted Druid. I then use my Arbor Elf to untap a Forest so I can tap it right away for 1 and use the mana to draw a card off my Bestiary. Then I pass to Matthew. For Matthew's turn, he plays a Plains and casts Commander Sphere before passing to Marc. For Marc's turn, he plays a West Vale Abbey and pays 4 to cast Explosive Vegetation. He chooses to get a Forest and a Swamp into play tapped, and then passes to Armin. For Armin's turn, he takes his first damage from his Bitter Blossom during his upkeep and uses it to make his first 1/1 fairy token. He plays another Snow-Covered Swamp and passes the turn. For my next turn, I scry and choose to keep the card in the top of my deck before drawing. I pay 5 and cast my General, Titania. With her ability, I bring back the forest I sacrificed earlier. I then use my Arbor Elf to untap a forest and tap it to draw an extra card with my Bestiary before passing the turn to Matthew. For Matthew's turn, he plays a Plains for his land and passes the turn. For Marc's turn, he plays an Evolving Wilds and pays 5 to cast Mazirek. Matthew plays Spell Swindle. It counters the spell, and he gains 5 treasure tokens as a result. Marc returns Mazirek to the command zone, and then passes to Armin. Armin takes his second damage from his Bitter Blossom to make his second fairy token, then plays another swamp, and passes the turn. For my turn, I scry my top card to the bottom and draw a card. I play a Thespian Stage and pay 2 to discard a card to cast Nostalgic Dreams, which I use to add Harrow from the graveyard back to my hand. I then enter the combat phase, and I attack Marc with Titania for 5. Marc pays 1 mana and casts Fog to prevent my damage. I then pass to Matthew. For Matthew's turn, he pays 4 to cast his General, Jodah, and then passes the turn. For Marc's turn, he plays Oran Reef the Vastwood, tapped, and recast Mazirek before passing to Armin. Armin takes another damage, putting him to 37, and now has 3 fairy tokens. He plays a Phyrexian Tower and pays 2 to cast Defense Grid, making it harder for people to stop each other's plays. In response, however, Matthew goes big and uses his Jodah's cheat cost ability and sacks his 5 treasure tokens to flash in the evil Jin Gitaxias, Core Ogre, in response. Armin sacrifices a token to the tower for 2 mana and taps 1 swamp to play Toxic Deluge. Armin pays 9 life, putting him to 28 to deal -9/-9 to the entire board. He had no choice but to do this, considering the fact that Mazirek just received 6 +1/+1 counters, 5 from the sacrificing of the treasure tokens by Matthew, and 1 from Armin himself by using the Phyrexian Tower sacrifice trigger. I float 3 mana in response to all creatures dying, and then Matthew, Marc, and myself return our respective commanders to their command zone. Then I tap my remaining lands for 6 total to play Krozen Grip to destroy Armin's Bitter Blossom. Armin taps 3 and uses 1 to play Dark Ritual, and then casts his General Chainer before passing the turn. For my turn, I scry the top card to the bottom of the deck and draw a card. Then with nothing else to do, I pass to Matthew. For Matthew's turn, he pays 3 to cast Dark Steel Ingot, and then pays 3 more to cast Staff of Domination and passes the turn. During his end phase, Marc sacrifices Evolving Wilds to search out a swamp into play tapped. Then for Marc's turn, Marc plays a Blighted Woodland and casts Mazirek for the third time this game. Then pays 3 to cast Vana's Hunger, which causes Armin to put Chainer back into the command zone and put a +1/+1 counter on Mazirek before he passes the turn. For Armin's turn, he plays another snow-covered swamp and pays 5 to cast Grey Merchant of Asphodel, and as his devotion to black is 2, each of us as opponents lose 2 life, and he gains a sum of that, putting him up 6. He passes, and during his end phase, I pay 6, thanks to the defense grid, and cast Harrow again to sack a forest to put 2 new ones from my deck into play. For my next turn, I keep my Scryed card at the top this time and draw it. I pay 7 mana to recast Titania and bring back a forest from my graveyard with her ability and pass a turn. For Matthew's turn, he plays a Bloodstained Mire and taps 6 to drop one of my favorite cards, Sunbird's Invocation. He then pays 1 to sack the Mire to search at an overgrown tomb into play tapped before passing the turn. That in turn puts a +1/+1 counter on Mazirek. For Marc's turn, he pays 1 to cast Carrion Feeder. He then moves into combat and attacks Armin with Mazirek. Then Marc passes the turn to Armin. For Armin's turn, he plays another snow-covered swamp, and then sacrifices his Grey Merchant to his Phyrexian Tower for 2 black mana, and then pays 5 more mana along with it for a total of 7, which, by the way, puts a +1/+1 counter on Mazirek again, and recasts Chainer. He then pays 3 life and uses his remaining 3 black mana to reanimate Jin Gitaxias from Matthew's grave and ends his turn. And thanks to Jin's really awesome ability, Armin gets to draw 7 cards during his end phase. For my turn, I keep the Scryed card on the top of my deck and draw it. Then I pay 4 mana to play Mulvaney Acid Moss, targeting Armin's Phyrexian Tower, destroying it and letting me search out another forest from my deck into play tapped. I then pay 3 to cast Beast Within, targeting Chainer. As Chainer is returned to the command zone, his effect causes Jin Gitaxias to be exiled, and Armin gains a 3/3 Beast token. I then move to combat, and I attack Matthew with Titania. I then pass a turn. For Matthew's turn, he plays a Taiga for his land, then pays 8 to cast Sandworm Convergence, which triggers his Sunbird's Invocation. And off of it, he gets the extremely evil Vorinclex, Voice of Hunger. In response to Vorinclex coming into play, Marc pays 4 and sacrifices his Blighted Woodland to search out 2 new lands into play tapped. That in turn also puts a +1/+1 counter on Mazirek. Matthew then ends his turn, getting a 5/5 worm token from his convergence. For Marc's turn, he pays 2 to play Golgari Signet, and passes. For Armin's turn, he plays a Scrying Sheets for his land, and also passes the turn. For my turn, I again keep the Scryed card at the top of my deck and draw it. I pay 6 and cast Desert Twister, targeting Matthew's Sunbird's Invocation, and pass a turn. For Matthew's turn, he pays 3 to play Chromatic Lantern. Then he makes full use of his double mana by casting Helm of the Host and equipping it to his Vorinclex. He moves to combat using the Helm to make a copy of Vorinclex, tripling his mana. He attacks Armin with the Worm token. He ends his turn by making another Worm token. For Marc's turn, he pays 2 to cast a Skiersdag High Priest. Then he moves to combat and attacks Armin with Mazirek for 6, before passing to Armin. For Armin's turn, he floats 5 mana and plays Lake of the Dead as his land for the turn. So he sacks 1 swamp to play the lake, and then another one so he could tap it to gain 4 black mana for a total of 9, and recasts his Chainer. That in turn puts 2 more +1/+1 counters on Mazirek, making him an 8/8. Then he passes to me. For my turn, sadly my lands remain tapped due to Vorinclex. I scry my top card to the bottom and draw. I play a forest and have no choice but to pass the turn. For Matthew's turn, he plays a mountain for his land and then pays 6 to recast Jodah. He then pays 6 mana to use his Staff of Domination to draw a card and then untap the staff. Then he drops in Progenitus, paying the cheat cost with Jodah. On top of that, he then casts Karn's Temporal Sundering to grab an extra turn and bounces my Titania back to my hand with its other effect. Matthew then moves into combat and gaining his 3rd Vorinclex in the process, but in response, Armin tries to play Entomb, where he would have used the combo attack with Ravenous Chupacabra and Chainer to kill the original Vorinclex, but then remembers that Defense Grid is still in play, which means he would be missing the mana necessary to animate it with Chainer. NANI? That's unfortunate. Continuing on, Matthew does indeed get his 3rd Vorinclex, quadrupling his mana, and attacks Armin for 10 with 2 Worm tokens. And during his end phase, Matthew makes his 3rd Worm token. Now we move on to Matthew's 2nd turn that he gained from the Karn card he played earlier. He starts off by playing Plague Wind, destroying all creatures that he doesn't control, making all of us defenseless against his ever-growing army. And with no board wipe, his Vorinclex continuously doubling and tripling and quadrupling his mana, all while shutting down ours and being able to draw and cast tons of cards thanks to his Staff of Domination, we collectively scoop it up to the now untouchable Matthew. Alright guys, that's it for this week's episode. We hope you enjoyed watching it. We really appreciate you tuning in. Want to just say thank you as always for the support for all of our viewers, subscribers, and fans. You guys are the best. And if you aren't already part of the BT Game Night EDH Commander Challenge family, go ahead and smash that subscribe button, smash the notification bell, so you know every time EDHCC drops a new video. Until next time, thank you guys for watching. I'm your host, BT. Reminding you to check out all of the videos on the channel and continue to join our game. It's now your turn. Cheers!